August 3, 1943. Near Nicosia, Sicily, Lieutenant General George S. Patton walks into the receiving tent of the 15th Evacuation Hospital while American artillery is still pounding the mountains to the east. The commander of the U.S. 7th Army is not there to inspect maps or question officers. He is moving from cot to cot, speaking to men whose bodies have been opened by shell fragments, bullets, mines, and burns. Then he stops in front of one soldier who shows no obvious wound. Private Charles H. Cool of L Company, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, sits exhausted and sick. Patton asks what is wrong. Cool speaks about his nerves. In the general's mind, those words carry a meaning more dangerous than any diagnosis. Patton has spent his life worshipping physical courage and fearing the collapse of fighting spirit. Now, inside a hospital filled with casualties from one of the hardest battles of the Sicilian campaign, he explodes. He curses the private, strikes him with his gloves, seizes him, and drives him from the tent. To the stunned doctors, nurses, orderlies, and wounded men watching, it is not discipline. It is an army commander attacking one of his own soldiers, and the first slap is only the beginning. 24 days earlier, on July 10, 1943, Patton's 7th Army comes ashore on Sicily as part of Operation Husky, the largest Allied amphibious operation yet attempted in the European War. More than 3,200 vessels support the invasion, and roughly 160,000 Allied troops form the initial assault force. General Sir Harold Alexander commands the 15th Army Group. General Bernard Montgomery leads the veteran British 8th Army. Patton commands the newly created American 7th Army, a force still trying to erase the memory of the humiliating defeat at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia only months earlier. Patton understands the judgment hanging over his men. British officers doubt American battlefield competence. German commanders remain dangerous. The terrain is cruel, the roads narrow, the heat punishing. Patton organizes Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's 2nd Corps around Major General Terry Allen's experienced 1st Infantry Division and Major General Troy Middleton's 45th Infantry Division, while Major General Lucian Truscott's 3rd Infantry Division operates on the left and elements of the 2nd Armored and 82nd Airborne Divisions wait in reserve. From the opening hours, Patton wants speed, aggression, and proof that Americans can fight, and that obsession soon collides with a reality he refuses to understand. The landings around Gela, Skogliti, and Licata turn almost immediately into chaos. Wind scatters airborne formations. Landing craft struggle through heavy surf. Vehicles bog in sand. Italian positions crack in places, but German armor counterattacks hard near Gela. Tanks grind toward the beaches, while naval guns answer from offshore, their shells screaming over American foxholes and detonating in columns of dust and black smoke. Men who have never heard concentrated artillery discover that the sound is not a single explosion, but an unbroken physical pressure, a hammering that rattles teeth, empties stomachs, and makes time lose shape. Patton sees only one acceptable response: move forward. He drives among forward units, demands offensive action, and cultivates the image of a general who appears wherever danger is greatest. His polished helmet, cavalry boots, pistols, profanity, and theatrical certainty become part of his command method. To frighten troops, he wants to look fearless because he believes fear is contagious. But Patton also believes the opposite, that courage can be imposed by command. That belief produces victories, and it also plants the seed of the confrontation waiting in the hospital near Nicosia. By July 22, Patton turns western Sicily into a demonstration of mobility. Alexander initially gives Montgomery's 8th Army the main burden of the advance toward Messina and assigns the Americans a supporting role, but the British advance slows against strong German resistance around Catania. Patton sees an opening. A provisional corps under Major General Jeffrey Keyes races roughly 100 miles toward Palermo, using the 2nd Armored, 82nd Airborne, and 3rd Infantry Divisions to rupture the weak Italian defenses in the west. Palermo falls in about 72 hours. The American sweep captures approximately 53,000 Italian troops and hundreds of vehicles at a cost of 272 American casualties in that phase. 3 days later, on July 25th, Benito Mussolini falls from power in Rome. Suddenly, Patton is not merely a loud cavalryman with a talent for publicity. He is becoming one of the most famous American commanders in the war. Yet the victory at Palermo does not end the campaign. On July 23, Alexander orders Patton east toward Messina, where General Hans Hub's 14th Panzer Corps is preparing a disciplined withdrawal behind mountain strongpoints. The easy pursuit is over, and the road ahead leads directly through Troina. The northeastern corner of Sicily is a defender's country. Mount Etna dominates the landscape. Ridges fold into ravines. Roads twist along cliffs, where one demolished bridge can halt an entire column. Hube has 4 powerful German formations available in the broader defense: the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, and the 1st Parachute Division. Their purpose is not simply to hold ground. They are buying time for an evacuation across the Strait of Messina. At Troina, beginning at the end of July, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division crashes into a defense built around high ground, artillery observation, mines, counterattacks, and carefully chosen fields of fire. American infantry climb exposed slopes beneath mortar bursts that throw stones and fragments into the air. Machine gun fire cuts across draws. German shells arrive with terrifying accuracy. Companies attack, stall, reorganize, and attack again. Men go without sleep. Some stop responding normally to commands. Others shake uncontrollably, vomit, stare into space, or become unable to continue, despite having no visible wound. The army has names for this: exhaustion, psychoneurosis, battle fatigue. But Patton has a simpler word, and that word is about to become dangerous. Private Charles Cool reaches an aid station on August 2 after repeated trouble at the front. His medical record does not describe a man casually avoiding duty. It records exhaustion and a moderately severe anxiety state, and it notes that he has already passed through medical care more than once during the campaign. He is moved through the 1st Medical Battalion system to the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia for further evaluation. There is another problem as well. Cool is physically ill. Subsequent examination finds malaria and a temperature reported at 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet when Patton enters the receiving tent on August 3rd, none of that is obvious from across the aisle. What Patton sees is a soldier sitting among men with bandages, blood, missing flesh, and visible wounds. What he hears is that the soldier's difficulty involves nerves. For a commander who interprets battlefield endurance as a moral test, the scene becomes intolerable. Patton does not pause to read the chart, consult the doctors, or ask how many times Cool has been returned to combat. He decides what the soldier is before the medical staff can explain what the soldier is suffering, and the next seconds threaten Patton's entire career. Patton's anger detonates in public. He berates Cool as a coward. He strikes the private across the face with gloves. When Cool does not move fast enough, Patton grabs him by the collar, hauls him up, and drives him toward the exit, continuing to shout. Witnesses later describe the general kicking him as he forces him from the tent. Around them lie wounded soldiers whom Patton has been praising for their bravery. The contrast makes the scene even more brutal. Cool is not a deserter captured miles behind the lines. He is a patient inside an army medical facility, placed there by the army's own medical system. The people responsible for his care now watch the commanding general override that system through rage. Patton's worldview is visible in every movement. Physical wounds earn compassion. Invisible collapse earns contempt. Yet the doctors know something that battlefield mythology often ignores. A nervous system can be overwhelmed by sustained terror, even when the skin remains unbroken. They have seen men who can no longer speak, men whose hands shake too violently to eat, men who wake screaming, and men who walk into treatment unable to remember where they are. Patton sees weakness. The hospital sees casualties, and that conflict cannot stay hidden forever. As the fighting around Troina reaches its climax in the first week of August, German defenders begin withdrawing after imposing severe losses and delaying the American advance. At roughly the same moment, Major General Clarence Hubner replaces Terry Allen in command of the 1st Infantry Division, reflecting deeper tensions over discipline, command style, and the condition of a formation that has fought through North Africa and Sicily. Patton's army keeps pushing east. Along the north coast, the 3rd Infantry Division advances through demolition after demolition, while amphibious end runs attempt to leap behind German positions. The geography turns every mile into an engineering problem. Craters split roads, blown bridges force detours, mines wait in shoulders and culverts. Above everything hangs the knowledge that the enemy is retreating, but retreating in good order. Patton wants Messina before Montgomery arrives from the south. The campaign becomes a race, and his headquarters radiates impatience. Then, on August 10th, Patton visits another hospital, the 93rd Evacuation Hospital near Santo Stefano. Once again, he walks among the wounded. Once again, he notices a soldier without an obvious injury. And once again, the most dangerous words the soldier can say concern his nerves. Private Paul G. Bennett serves in Battery C of the 17th Field Artillery Regiment, an artillery formation operating with 7th Army in Sicily. He is not a fresh replacement shocked by his first shell burst. Bennett is a 4-year Army veteran who has experienced hard campaigning, and medical personnel send him to the hospital after symptoms that make continued duty unsafe. He sits in the receiving area when Patton confronts him. The general asks what is wrong. Bennett explains that he cannot stand the shelling anymore, and that his nerves are breaking. To a modern audience, the words sound like an obvious description of combat trauma. To Patton, they sound like confession. His face hardens. His voice rises. The atmosphere in the tent changes instantly because some of the staff already know what happened a week earlier. They understand that this is not a theoretical argument about military psychiatry. A lieutenant general with 3 stars and command of an army is standing over an enlisted patient whose power in the situation is almost non-existent. Bennett begins to cry. Instead of softening Patton, the tears drive him further into fury, and what happens next turns an ugly incident into a command crisis. Patton curses Bennett and tells him, in substance, that men like him should not occupy hospital space beside the physically wounded. Witness accounts describe the general threatening that such a soldier ought to be put against a wall and shot. They also describe Patton bringing his pistol into the tirade before striking Bennett across the face. He orders the hospital staff to get the man out and send him back toward the front. When Bennett remains there, Patton strikes him again. Colonel Donald E. Currier, the hospital commander, and other medical personnel now face an extraordinary dilemma. They are officers in a rigid chain of command, but they are also responsible for patients under their care. The man violating the clinical environment is not a reckless captain or an angry sergeant. He is the army commander. Nobody can simply overpower Patton in the tent, yet nobody can pretend the event is normal. The slap itself lasts a fraction of a second, but the institutional consequences begin immediately. The medical officers start documenting what they have seen, because if the command chain refuses to hear them, another chain will. Colonel Richard T. Arnest, the 2nd Corps surgeon, becomes a crucial figure because the complaint now moves beyond rumor. Reports pass through command and medical channels. Brigadier General William B. Keane, Chief of Staff of 2nd Corps, is part of the command route toward Omar Bradley. Bradley is Patton's subordinate and a commander who understands both Patton's battlefield value and his volatility. One report reaches him, but the matter does not immediately explode. The medical channel proves harder to contain. Arnest's information moves toward Brigadier General Frederick A. Bless at Allied Force Headquarters, and by August 16, the allegations reach General Dwight D. Eisenhower. That changes everything. Eisenhower is not only Patton's superior, he is balancing an Anglo-American coalition, preparing future operations in Italy, protecting relations with Washington, and managing generals whose egos can become strategic problems. He knows Patton's strengths intimately. In Tunisia, Patton has helped restore confidence to 2nd Corps after Kasserine. In Sicily, he has delivered speed, initiative, and battlefield success. But Eisenhower also knows that a commander who cannot control himself can become as dangerous politically as he is useful tactically. Now Ike must decide whether America can afford to lose Patton or afford to excuse him. On August 17, 1943, the same day, American troops enter Messina and bring the Sicilian campaign to its climax. Eisenhower's response strikes at Patton's deepest fear. Eisenhower makes clear in a private letter dated August 17 that he views the reported conduct as serious and indefensible. He does not immediately convene a public court-martial or formal disciplinary proceeding, but he demands corrective action and warns Patton that such behavior threatens his usefulness. Investigators and medical officers work to determine what happened. Lieutenant Colonel Perrin H. Long, a theater medical consultant, interviews witnesses and prepares a report on the mistreatment of patients at the 15th and 93rd evacuation hospitals. The irony is almost cruel. Militarily, Patton is at the peak of his Sicilian triumph. Elements of Truscott's 3rd Infantry Division reach Messina after a brutal eastward advance, and Patton has won the celebrated race against Montgomery. Strategically, however, the Germans succeed in evacuating roughly 60,000 troops across the strait, preserving experienced formations for the coming defense of Italy. Patton stands in a captured city while another battle begins behind closed doors, and this one cannot be won with tanks. The Sicily campaign ends after 38 days of combat. The U.S. Army's official campaign history places total Allied losses at 31,158, while Axis losses reach roughly 167,000, killed, wounded, and captured, with enormous numbers of Italian prisoners included in that figure. Mussolini is out of power. The Mediterranean position of the Axis is cracking. Allied forces are preparing to cross onto the Italian mainland in September, yet 7th Army Headquarters is not scheduled to lead the next major American landing at Salerno. Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark's 5th Army receives that role. This is not simply a punishment invented after the slapping incidents. Major command arrangements for Italy are already moving in that direction. But Patton's behavior now makes every decision about his future harder. His superiors no longer have to ask only whether he can defeat German formations. They have to ask whether he can be trusted with the political and human responsibilities of higher command. For Patton, who has built his identity around becoming a great captain of history, that judgment cuts deeper than any official reprimand could, and Eisenhower is about to force him into the most humiliating act of his career. On August 21, Patton meets Paul Bennett privately. The general who has commanded tens of thousands of men now has to apologize to a single enlisted soldier he has struck. Bennett accepts the apology, and the two shake hands. On August 22, Patton meets members of the medical staffs connected to the incidents, including personnel who have watched him violate the sanctuary of their hospital tents. He expresses regret for his impulsive conduct. though witnesses do not all consider the explanation convincing. Patton attempts to explain the belief behind his actions. He fears cowardice spreading through units. He carries memories from earlier wars. He believes that forcing a frightened man to master himself may save him from disgrace or worse. But explanation is not absolution. The medical officers have watched soldiers deteriorate under prolonged combat, and they know that symptoms do not disappear because a general calls them shameful. On August 23rd, Patton meets Charles Cool and apologizes. Cool, whose illness includes malaria, does not demand Patton's destruction. He says, in effect, that Patton did not understand how sick he was. The private shows the general more mercy than the general showed him, but Patton's humiliation is still not finished. Between August 24th and August 30, Patton travels to formations of the 7th Army and addresses soldiers directly. The task is almost unbearable for a man whose command persona depends on certainty. For years, Patton has trained himself to project dominance. He speaks in absolutes. He expects fear to be concealed, orders to be obeyed, and weakness to be overcome. Now he stands before the same combat soldiers whose admiration matters desperately to him and acknowledges that he has been too harsh. He does not always describe every detail of the 2 hospital incidents, but the meaning is understood. Word has traveled through the army faster than any official memorandum. Men know the general has struck patients. Some resent him, others defend him. Many separate the act from the commander and continue to admire his aggressiveness. At one appearance, especially before the 3rd Infantry Division, troops respond with support as Patton struggles through the apology. Their reaction reveals the central paradox of the scandal. The same style that produces his worst behavior also creates extraordinary loyalty among soldiers who believe he can lead them to victory. Eisenhower sees both sides, and that is why Patton is neither simply forgiven nor simply destroyed. For several months, the scandal remains largely inside military circles. War correspondents in the Mediterranean learn the story. Some interview witnesses. Senior officers become aware that reporters know enough to publish. Eisenhower faces a wartime information problem as dangerous as the disciplinary problem itself. Patton is famous, and the Allies are preparing a sequence of operations that will eventually lead to the invasion of Western Europe. A public scandal could force Washington to remove a commander Eisenhower still considers militarily valuable. Correspondents initially hold the story after discussions with headquarters, a decision that reflects the unusual wartime relationship between the press and commanders. But secrecy is not silence. Thousands of soldiers have heard versions of what happened. Letters travel home. Rumors move between units. In Washington, files and conversations preserve the allegations. The story is now like a delayed action shell, buried under Patton's career. It can remain quiet for weeks, perhaps months. But once someone touches the fuse, every American newspaper will want the name of the general and the name of the soldier. That fuse burns down on November 21, 1943. Radio commentator Drew Pearson tells a nationwide audience that Patton has struck a hospitalized soldier in Sicily and has been disciplined by Eisenhower. Some details in Pearson's account are inaccurate or blended, but the central allegation is true. The War Department initially offers no comment. Allied headquarters in Algiers issues a carefully worded denial that Patton has been formally reprimanded, exploiting the technical military meaning of reprimand without directly erasing the underlying event. The maneuver fails. Reporters demand the full story. Congress begins asking questions. Newspapers that have not printed the incident now prepare to do so. The controversy crosses the Atlantic and enters American homes, where parents imagine their sons surviving German shells only to be struck by their own commanding general. Others react very differently. They see Patton as the kind of ruthless battlefield leader necessary to defeat Hitler, and fear that civilian outrage will destroy an effective commander over a moment of anger. The country divides over a question that still follows military leadership today: how much misconduct can battlefield brilliance excuse? The political response becomes intense because Patton is no ordinary officer. By late 1943, he is one of the most recognizable American generals in uniform. His victories in North Africa and Sicily have created a public image of aggression at a moment when Americans desperately want evidence that their army can beat the Wehrmacht on land. Members of Congress call the hospital episode disgraceful and demand punishment. Other voices insist that combat cannot be judged by peacetime standards. Former officers defend Patton. Some soldiers defend him. Others are appalled. Even among Patton's friends, the reaction is not uniform. General of the Armies, John J. Pershing, an icon from World War I and a man Patton deeply reveres, condemns the conduct, a personal blow that wounds Patton badly. Yet Cool's own family does not become the spearhead of a campaign to ruin the general. His father asks that Patton not be destroyed over the incident. By mid-December, the government receives roughly 1,500 letters on the controversy, reflecting support, anger, confusion, and the extraordinary emotional hold Patton now has on the public. Eisenhower must make a decision with consequences far beyond one man's career. Eisenhower consults Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, and other senior officials. The choice is not between approving Patton's conduct and condemning it. Eisenhower has already condemned it privately. The real choice is whether the misconduct makes Patton unusable. Eisenhower concludes that it does not. He believes Patton possesses an uncommon ability to command fast-moving armies, and that the coming battles in Europe may require exactly that talent. Stimson defends retaining him because the United States still faces bitter fighting before victory. At the same time, Patton pays a real price. He does not return immediately to combat. His 7th Army has no new battlefield role after Sicily. He spends months in uncertainty, watching other commanders receive responsibilities he desperately wants. Omar Bradley, his former subordinate and junior, rises toward command of the U.S. First Army for the invasion of France. The slapping affair is not the sole reason for every assignment decision, and Eisenhower's planning has other operational causes, but Patton himself believes the scandal has damaged his prospects. For a man who measures life in commands won and battles fought, the waiting becomes a punishment sharper than a formal sentence. The unexpected turning point is that Patton's disgrace soon becomes useful. Allied planners preparing Operation Overlord need the Germans to believe that the main invasion of France will strike the Pas de Calais, the shortest route across the English Channel, rather than Normandy. The deception system that develops into Operation Fortitude South creates a fictitious formation, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly massing in southeastern England. Dummy equipment, controlled radio traffic, double agents, and carefully managed appearances support the illusion. Patton becomes one of the most convincing pieces of the deception because German intelligence respects him. To German planners, a commander with his reputation for armored aggression appears too valuable to waste on a secondary operation. If Patton is associated with forces opposite Calais, then perhaps Calais really is the main target. The general who fears that scandal has made him irrelevant becomes valuable precisely because the enemy believes he must matter. He does not command the D-Day assault on June 6, 1944, but his reputation helps give weight to the Phantom Army threatening another landing, and the consequences extend far beyond his personal humiliation. When Allied troops storm Normandy on June 6, German leaders do not immediately conclude that Normandy is the sole decisive invasion. The deception campaign, combined with geography, intelligence failures, and Hitler's own expectations, helps keep powerful German formations oriented toward the Pas de Calais for crucial weeks. Patton's role is only one element in a vast system, but it is an important human element. His name functions like a weapon. This is one of history's strangest reversals. The same general whose uncontrolled temper nearly removes him from battlefield command contributes to the invasion while not firing a shot in Normandy. Yet Patton is not content to remain a decoy. He wants an army. Eisenhower and Bradley still believe his operational talent can be decisive once the Americans break out of the Norman lodgment. On August 1, 1944, almost a year after the first hospital assault, Patton receives command of the U.S. Third Army. The rehabilitation is complete enough for combat, but not because the slaps are forgotten. It occurs because senior leaders decide that accountability and utility can coexist, and Patton now has one last chance to prove that their gamble is worth the risk. Third Army enters battle as the breakthrough created by Operation Cobra opens the German front in Normandy. Patton unleashes formations through Enraged and turns the breakthrough into a pursuit. Armor races west into Brittany and east toward the Seine. Road columns stretch for miles. Fuel trucks, tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, engineers, infantry, and ambulances surge through a logistical system, moving faster than many staffs believe possible. Patton's instincts, speed, initiative, relentless pressure, are suddenly operating in the environment for which they seem designed. By the end of August, Third Army has swept across huge areas of France, and Patton's reputation rises again. In December, when German forces smash into the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, Patton pivots Third Army north and attacks toward Bastogne, demonstrating the staff preparation and operational flexibility that even his critics acknowledge. The battlefield brilliance is real, so is the hospital violence. The two truths exist together, and that is precisely why the story resists the simple ending of hero or villain. The soldiers Patton strikes do not become footnotes merely because the general later wins battles. Charles Cool survives the war and returns to civilian life. Paul Bennett also survives the immediate incident and continues his life beyond Sicily. Their experiences matter because military history often magnifies commanders until enlisted men become numbers, moving beneath arrows on a map. The slapping incidents reverse that perspective. For a few minutes, the entire weight of rank, reputation, and institutional power bears down on two enlisted soldiers whose injuries are not easy to see. Cool's chart records repeated exhaustion and anxiety as well as physical illness. Bennett's distress follows combat and shelling. Neither man possesses the vocabulary or authority to debate a lieutenant general about psychiatry. Their vulnerability is the point. Leadership is tested most severely, not when a commander faces an equal, but when he confronts someone who cannot answer back. Patton fails that test in August 1943, and the Army's reaction, imperfect, cautious, politically calculated, still establishes that battlefield success does not place a commander completely beyond judgment. There is another uncomfortable layer. Patton's defenders are not wrong when they say that fear can spread through a unit, that discipline matters, and that an army in combat cannot function if every soldier chooses independently when to leave the line. Commanders in Sicily face brutal operational pressure. German troops are withdrawing skillfully. Every delay costs lives. Replacement systems are strained. Experienced infantrymen are precious. A battalion commander who loses too many men to exhaustion can watch combat power evaporate without a single enemy breakthrough. Patton understands this operational danger with unusual intensity. Where he fails is in believing that humiliation and violence provide a reliable cure. The distinction matters. Military medicine is not asking commanders to abandon standards. It is trying to preserve combat power by treating breakdown as a predictable consequence of battle rather than a simple moral defect. The best armies learn to combine discipline with diagnosis. Patton, on those 2 August days, chooses discipline without diagnosis, and his own superiors decide that a commander who demands self-control from thousands must first demonstrate it himself. Patton dies on December 21, 1945, after injuries from an automobile accident in Germany, only months after the European War ends. He does not live long enough to see how completely his legend will grow. In the decades that follow, admirers celebrate the commander who understands armored movement, demands speed, inspires aggressiveness, and refuses to let defeated enemies recover. Critics point to impulsiveness, vanity, harshness, prejudice, and moments when his certainty overwhelms judgment. The hospital incidents sit at the center of that argument because they compress his greatest strength and greatest weakness into seconds. He believes willpower can change events, and on battlefields, that conviction often produces extraordinary results. He also believes willpower can overcome another man's invisible injury, and there it becomes cruelty. The same confidence that lets him order exhausted formations forward also prevents him from recognizing when exhaustion itself has become a wound. History does not need to choose one pattern and erase the other. The commander at Avranches and the general in the hospital tent are the same man, and understanding him requires holding both images at once. The strategic consequences of Sicily remain larger than Patton's scandal. The island falls. Mussolini's regime collapses. Italy signs an armistice announced on September 8, 1943. German forces occupy much of the peninsula and continue fighting, forcing the Allies into a long, costly campaign, from Salerno and Cassino to Anzio, Rome, the Gothic Line, and finally, the Po Valley. The German divisions evacuated from Sicily help prolong that resistance. In that sense, Patton's race to Messina is both a victory and an incomplete success. He captures the objective, but the enemy saves much of its fighting strength. The same duality defines the slapping affair. Eisenhower condemns Patton privately and forces apologies, but retains him because the war still requires aggressive commanders. Patton loses time and opportunity, but not his career. The army condemns the act without discarding the officer. Whether that balance is just remains debatable, but the decision reveals how wartime institutions calculate risk, morality, morale, public confidence, and military necessity all press against one another, and there is rarely a clean answer. What shocks the army is therefore not simply the physical act of a slap. Armies are violent institutions, operating in violent environments. Soldiers shout, commanders punish, and combat strips away many peacetime assumptions. The shock comes from where the violence is directed and what it represents. Patton is supposed to turn controlled violence outward, against the enemy. Inside the hospital, he turns it downward, against a subordinate under medical care. He mistakes vulnerability for betrayal. He uses the enormous authority of command at the moment a soldier has the least ability to protect himself. And because Patton is so successful elsewhere, the incident forces everyone around him to confront a difficult truth. Competence does not cancel character. A commander may be brilliant in maneuver and still fail in judgment. A leader may inspire thousands and still humiliate one. Victory can make institutions reluctant to discipline the people who produce it, which is precisely why standards matter most when the offender is valuable. On August 3rd and August 10th, 1943, no German tank breaks through an American line because Charles Kuhl or Paul Bennett receives medical care. No bridge falls because doctors recognize combat exhaustion. No division collapses because a frightened soldier enters a hospital. The crisis comes from Patton's fear that this might happen, and from his conviction that fear must be beaten out before it spreads. Yet the episode teaches the opposite lesson. Fear hidden by shame does not disappear. Trauma denied by command does not cease to exist. An army that cannot distinguish cowardice from injury risks destroying men it still needs. And a commander who cannot distinguish force from leadership risks becoming a danger to the very institution he serves. Patton survives the scandal because Eisenhower believes he can still help win the war, and Patton later proves that operational judgment correct on battlefield after battlefield. But survival is not vindication. The apologies remain necessary. The reports remain real. The two soldiers remain part of his story. That is why the incident endures after the maps change and the armies vanish. It is not merely an anecdote about a famous general losing his temper. It is a case study in power under pressure. Patton stands at the top of an army whose men are being asked to endure artillery, mines, disease, sleep deprivation, heat, fear, and death. He expects them to master themselves because the mission depends on it. But the same standard applies upward. The greater the authority, the greater the obligation to control impulse, listen to expertise, and recognize the humanity of those beneath the rank insignia. On a Sicilian afternoon, Patton forgets that principle and strikes a man he is responsible for protecting. The blow echoes through hospitals, headquarters, newspapers, Congress, and eventually the history of military leadership itself. Because winning never gives a commander permission to stop understanding the people who make victory possible.